City. Welcome to today's City Council meeting. Our meetings are public and you are welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whichever manner you feel most comfortable. Today, this meeting currently is a work session during which there's no public comment, but later today at 7 p.m. we'll have a formal meeting within which there is an opportunity for the public to share their comments. And of course, we always welcome your feedback anytime to P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114-5476. You can also reach out to us by email at council.comments@slcgov.com or via our 24-hour phone comment line 801-535-7654. Written comments that we receive on agenda-related topics are shared with all council members and are also posted on our website, slccouncil.com. And now we'll begin our work session. Our first item on the work session agenda is item 1, updates from the administration. Hello.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Hi. We will go ahead and get started.
Just a brief note. Those microphones at the presenter's table now require you to push the button to turn it on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't know that. We'll go ahead and get started with the slides. As always, just a reminder that the slc.gov/feedback page is a great way for residents to engage with the city and see all of the different surveys and things that are open, public comment periods that are open right now. Next slide, please. We have some updates from Public Utilities on the City Creek Water Treatment Plant. Public Utilities is working with the contractor on tentative plans to start closures when primary construction begins, which will likely be in January. Currently, the canyon is open with no construction-related closures planned for the rest of the year. And Public Utilities is working on putting together a potential groundbreaking ceremony for the beginning of next year. They are using signage, social media, mass text messages, and their website to communicate pertinent information to the public. Next slide, please. The public comment period for the remedial action plan for the Other Side Village started on June 23rd, and the Division of Environmental Quality received one set of comments so far. It's likely that more comments will be received, which will delay approval of the remedial action plan and thus when construction can start. And members of the public can submit comments through July 23rd to the Utah Department of Environmental Quality by emailing cjhowell@utah.gov. Next slide, please. A couple of updates from public lands. Both Steenblick Park and Donner Trail Park will be reimagined using GeoBond dollars, and public engagement is underway for both parks to understand the community's vision and needs for those parks. Steenblick Park, they have received 232 survey responses so far and are planning to keep that survey open through August. Next week on the 18th, they will do an engagement event with a popular taco truck to encourage people to share their input. And at Donner Trail Park, they have received 278 survey responses so far. And again, we'll keep that survey open through August. Most of those survey responses so far are coming entirely from yard signs, word of mouth, and social media. And they will be attending the East Bench Community Council Ice Cream Social next week to engage and encourage people to take that survey. And both of those survey links are currently linked on the feedback page. Next slide, please. We have a number of updates from planning, so I put them in a table because I feel like that's easier to see. For gas stations near bodies of water, an online open house has been started for this text amendment. Community councils citywide have been notified of the application and will have 45 days to submit comments. And this is tentatively set to go before the Planning Commission on September 13th. Affordable housing incentives have been transmitted with the ordinance to CAN, and then the public input process is underway for both the Ballpark Station Area zoning map amendments and the 2100 South Station Area plan and zoning amendments. And then for both the adaptive reuse ordinance and the historic overlay enforcement, draft ordinances are being. Next slide, please. Here are our community outreach team's office hours for the month of July. I will be at Red Butte Garden tomorrow. I was at De Los Muertos Tacos yesterday, and it's always a great chance to talk with community members and engage with the public. And that is it for me.
All right, next slide, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is not it for me. Here are a number of upcoming events in July. I apologize. I forgot about this one. These are city-sponsored events, ACE events, and just events that the public are welcome to attend. It's definitely event season in the city. So, and before I close, any questions for me on all these updates? Thank you.
I don't see any. Thank you.
I'll take questions on those as well if you'd like.
Which ones will you be at, Andrew?
Next slide. As many as I'm invited to, Council Chair. The information you'll see here is an update from about 3 weeks ago from this council. July 3rd through the 7th, you can see still a high utilization rate for the resource centers, which is typical. You also see that CAMN impact mitigation work will be done on South Temple this week near the freeway underpass. And then a lot of camps, obviously, a lot of work by the rapid intervention teams. Resource fair this Friday at Pioneer Park in the morning, and then Kayak Court is going to return to the river this month since we're past the critical stage of potential flooding, and so they're going to be back there engaging with folks. And we haven't had any issues, to my knowledge, along the river this spring, so that's good news. A couple of verbal updates for you all on things that are probably pertinent to your interest. One is the $500,000 of the council allocated towards sanctioned camping and pursuing that concept in a pilot way. We have had discussions between administration staff and the departments and the council staff to talk through the intent of that funding, parameters of what could be recommended for what the outcomes should be, and then also a process that hopefully will work for you all, and you'll be briefed on that very, very quickly along with the mayor, so you can have discussions on that. We also know that earlier today you talked through a loan change for Ville Properties, Ville 1659, which is one of those 3 homeless housing grant properties we talked about for a while now. It's good news, it's on track. Hopefully this fall from where units to open up. We know that Fair Park Point is open and I think fully leased up at this point with 94 units. And then Ville will be 197 units, I believe, still. And there should be news coming out very shortly about the medically vulnerable program, the MVP program, with information on their update as well. So that's good news. Last piece, Councilmember Dugan and myself have been joining with the Conference of Mayors group regarding the winter overflow planning. Winter services this year. They are working on 3 different groups weekly on elements of that. The deadline to submit the proposal to the state is August 1st, so within 3 weeks from today. So we'll have some definitive ideas at that point about what the plans will look like, and more updates at that point for you all. Are there any questions?
Council members, any questions for Andrew?
No, I just have a request on the, not for anybody, but for the public in general. The Pioneer Park on Friday, where the resource fair, I will have my table again, and I'm collecting used clothes that you might want to give away to some of our shelter friends. So please stop by or just drop them off to me here, and I'll take them on Friday morning. Okay?
Thanks, Councilmember Valdemoros.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like those are all the comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to item number 2 on our agenda. Item number 2 is a briefing about a resolution for the capital improvement program projects for the year. Ben Ludke, Council Policy Analyst, will give us an introduction. And then I have a bunch of other names listed, but are they here? Okay. Oh,
I think they're behind me.
okay, great. I have Aaron Price, Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Mike Atkinson, Chief Asset Planning Manager and CIP Impact Fees Manager, Rachel Molinari, CIP and Impact Fee Manager, and Jordan Smith, CIP Financial Analyst, and Mary Beth Thompson available as needed. Go ahead and give us an introduction, Ben.
You should all have the long funding log. Yep, that's the one. And we also have extra copies of the long and the short funding log on the table if anybody needs an extra copy. And the order of projects is identical between the two. So it's from the highest to the lowest scored. They also have the same ID number. So if in doubt, you can always say, you know, project number, and it'll be exactly the same between the different funding logs. And PDF versions are attached to the staff report if you prefer electronic copies.
Thanks, Ben.
Quick recap, the council added a little over $1.2 million to CIP above the mayor's recommended budget. And if you go to the last page of the long funding log, you'll see $2 amounts highlighted in green. That is the $1.2 million that was added. And it's not allocated, so it's available. The amount is split. About half of it is general fund, your most flexible dollars available to go to any project. The other half, the $644,000, is from funding our future. There are 5 projects that council members previously highlighted, projects of interest, that were not recommended for funding by the advisory board or the mayor. You can find those listed on page 2 of the staff report. Just a reminder that the funding recommendations from the advisory board and the mayor are nearly identical this year. The only exceptions are the 3 projects also on the last page of the funding log. Those were added after the advisory board made their funding recommendations.
I'm sorry, Ben, say that one more time.
On the last page, you'll see 3 projects that did not get scored by the advisory board. They were added after they made their recommendations.
Those are the West Side Art Project, maintenance of vacant city-owned property, and urban trails maintenance?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
There's new information about 2 projects in the staff report. It starts at the bottom of page 3. Project number 1, so the highest scored project, is the Library Plaza Structural Assessment and Visioning Project. There's some additional description about how that might relate to previous studies that the council funded. And there's a policy question about how multiple studies would be related to this, specifically 200 East between Washington Square and Library Plaza. You may recall funding a study for the Green Loop around downtown, which runs down 200 East. Right. The council also funded a master plan of this block, Washington Square. And during the council's past discussions, the concept of a civic campus was raised to connect these blocks, Washington Square, Library Plaza, and then the Public Safety Building. And various ideas were raised, such as changing 200 East, as well as infrastructure changes to support public events and festivals. So if the civic campus is something the council's interested in, that would be helpful policy feedback for this funding and this study. The other project is number 60 with new information. That is maintenance of city-owned property. So it's one of the 3 on the last page of the funding log. The staff report, and you'll see a summary in the funding log description. There are 5 individual uses for that funding that we received from the Real Estate Services Office. And I wanted to point out there is $600,000 remaining from last fiscal year. So it's CIP, the funds do not lapse to fund balance. So there's $600,000 for maintenance of city-owned property that's still there that would fully fund those 5 projects that are listed. A $500,000 new funding request is before the council. There's always something unexpected that comes up, so some funding is probably needed for maintenance of city-owned property, but I wanted to highlight there is a significant amount remaining from last fiscal year. For the agenda schedule going forward, the council vote on the project-specific allocations is scheduled for August 15th. And the first of 2 public hearings is scheduled for next Tuesday. The second public hearing is scheduled for August 8th.
Mr. Chair, sorry, Sorry, Ben.
Go
can
ahead.
So what was the new information part of the library plaza?
So we asked how the Library Plaza study would relate to the multiple other studies that are looking at 200 East and then either this block and or Library Plaza. And the council previously talked about a civic campus concept. That wasn't specifically called out for this, but since it was a council interest, we wanted to raise that idea if it's something you wanted this study to also look at, or if you wanted more information about the multiple studies for the same area.
Okay. So, okay. It's more of a question than like new info, right?
More of a question, a little extra background info. That's it for my intro. Mr. Chair, we typically go page by page through the funding log. We can do that. We can jump around to council member projects or open it up for questions.
May have missed, you said there were 3 projects with new information: library, maintenance of city-owned. What was the third?
Just 2 projects with new info.
I just heard the wrong number. Okay.
It was probably the 3 projects on the last page of the funding log that the board didn't consider.
Okay, got it. So, I think it would be good to go through them one by one like we typically do.
Okay, starting on page 1.
Yep, let's start at the top.
And I'll ask Scott if he can zoom in for people viewing so they can read the project descriptions a little easier.
So this library one, I feel like has been on the list for a long time.
There have been different iterations
This
of
is
it.
different than the roof
It is
that we did
different.
last year, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I feel like in the past, people have, or council members have like expressed interest in it, but it didn't seem as urgent. So I guess I'm surprised to see that it is still like not recommended for any funding.
I think part of
It's
the
recommended for funding.
What?
Yeah.
It's the number one
Oh.
recommended one.
Well, okay. That makes a lot more sense. I'm looking like, right, I'm like, there's there's a bunch of
Oh.
zeros. Or a bunch of not even zeros.
let me
Okay.
point out that
It's confused, yeah.
under the
A lot of my questions, so just move on. Move on. Sorry.
under the bolded title, you will see in italics the requested amount. So if you're wondering if something is fully funded, you can see what was requested and then what was actually recommended in the columns and the funding sources to the right.
And based on an earlier conversation, I'll add another point of clarification that each of the columns are a different source of funding. So there's a column for general fund, a column for impact fees, column for transportation funding. So that's also why some of the columns might have numbers in them and some might not.
Well, it makes sense now.
If you need a review of the funding sources, I'm happy to do it. It's also attachment 5.
Okay. Let's go to number 2.
Do you want me to speak to each one or just see if council
Oh.
members have any questions?
Let's read the heading. Okay.
So number 2, safer crossings. There are 10 crossings at Main Street. This would also be Glendale Park, 1700 South, and a few locations citywide that are to be determined.
Okay.
If they're to be determined, is it too early to suggest?
I think the Livable Streets program helps prioritize those, but suggestions are always welcome.
Need them to look at 1200 West, especially the place where our seniors have no protected crossing to the Smiths, but literally the whole thing, it's terribly dangerous.
North Temple or 1200 West and
Ideally from 300 North to 1000 North at least, but definitely between the 6 and 1000 North corridor. The senior, well, I get yelled at when I call it senior. It's 55 and over housing, but there is a great preponderance of like actually senior citizens who live there, and they are very close to the 600 North intersection. So I understand that it might seem irrational to put a mid-block crossing there, but this is a special, almost ADA-ish kind of concern I have.
Ben, I guess the question related to the CIP funding log is there are some streets and some places listed, but two questions. Is the one that Councilmember Peacher just mentioned listed, and what is the citywide, like how much of that citywide is still to be determined where it's going to be used?
Okay. We'll take a look at the files that came with the application. It might have those details. We'll get it in the staff report for next meeting.
Thanks, Ben.
If there's nothing else, I think we can go to next page.
Mm-hmm.
So number 3 is 200 East, ADA and sidewalk improvements. And this is recommended for funding.
Okay.
And then number 4, this is an item the council sees every year. It is transit capital for frequent transit routes. So these are the frequent bus routes every 15-minute service that the council funds from Funding Our Future. This funding is to make improvements to the bus stops. So the city typically pours and owns the concrete pad, and then UTA partners with the city for the amenities, the shelter, the benches, etc. And they do empty the trash, because that's often a question. UTA does.
And this would be for the 200 and Redwood Road. Okay.
And this will be ongoing for a couple of years as we go through all the bus stops.
I would expect to see this every year for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
The goal of getting the same level of amenities at every bus stop on all the frequent transit routes is going to take several years of funding. And then after that, it'd be a reevaluating, do you want that on the routes with a lower level of service?
Right.
I see.
Quick question on this one, Mr. Chair. The request amount is 1.5 million, and the recommended amount from the board and the mayor is $1 million bucks. What will be the difference in service by not funding it to the requested funding? I think it's a question I would like to find out. What will be the effect? So I would like to know what the impact of that gap funding will be.
The $400,000 gap.
Correct.
Okay.
Because there is, according to this sheet, there is some positive funds on the general fund and then Funding Our Future, on the tune of $600,000 or so in each of those funds. So,
I guess to maybe even more specific, like how many stops does 1.1 get us, and how many stops would 1.5 get
Well,
us?
and to Council Member Pui's point, the request was 1.5, but it only adds up to 1.1 in the funding log.
Partially funded.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to make sure that what the impact, when that gap is, what will that be impact?
Okay. So that takes us to number 5, the Complete Streets program. And this request is also a mix of specific projects: 2100 South reconstruction, Virginia Street reconstruction, and some to be determined citywide locations. And this additional funding is for adding like traffic calming elements, complete street elements to these reconstruction projects. So medians, pedestrian bulb outs, crosswalk enhancements, bike lanes. The Transportation and Engineering Division, they're moving to not have these funding requests be separate, one for reconstructing the road, one for having complete street and traffic calming elements. In the future, they're trying to combine those into just one single funding request. But this is additional funding, in part because of inflation and cost increases. You've previously approved funding to add this to 2100 South, but this is additional funding for the current design.
Okay. That's also partially funded currently.
Yes.
I guess I would be interested in knowing what the 3.3 gets us versus the 6.6.
Okay.
And what would be the higher priority streets for that?
I think
Assuming it only gets us one of the two streets or whatever.
I think the two specific ones would be prioritized because they're receiving bond funding from the streets reconstruction bond, and that needs to be spent within 3 years. So there's more urgency to add the complete street funding since those bond funded projects have a
2100
timeliness.
South and Virginia Street,
Correct.
but the citywide we may not be able to do with the 3.3.
That's my guess.
Okay. Sounds good.
So number 6, this is another one that comes in CIP most years, the Public Way Concrete Program. So mostly sidewalks, curbs and gutter, but sometimes it involves retaining walls or other concrete infrastructure. It is sidewalk to sidewalk, anything in the public way that's not a street.
I would like to ask a little question on this one. How is the city prioritizing this request? I personally submitted probably a 6, very dangerous. Actually, one of those I was doing it with Councilmember Petro last 4th of July, so a year ago, and it's still there. And it's about a foot of a step and a sidewalk in an area that there's a lot of seniors, and it's very dangerous to do that. And I would like to know how we're prioritizing this. Is it by request? Are we using some sort of data gathering? So that would be very important to me.
And has all of the damage done by the windstorm been fixed as well? The Rose Park in particular, sidewalks were really impaired that way.
I don't know if there's an equitable way of doing this. Maybe if the administration comes up with an answer, maybe I will be interested in maybe finding how long this money goes for. How many 6 feet of sidewalk do we get for $750,000, just to have an idea? Or I don't know. This might be an important thing for me to know.
I would be willing to bet that it doesn't cover the whole city.
No, that's true.
Or anywhere close to that.
No.
So I think I think what Councilor Pui was maybe asking, but maybe the piece of that question that I'm most interested in is how are we deciding how to spend the $750,000, understanding that it won't cover the whole city?
Yep.
And is it just based on requests, or is it based on I was really impressed with the road condition survey where it was done by data and a machine that
Lasers.
lasers
that told us what the condition of the street was. Is there something like that with concrete as well? Would be an interesting.
Let me tell you quick. There's a piece in my district in Glendale that has metal on top of the sidewalk, because the sidewalk, there's a hole under it, and the neighbors put a piece of metal on it, and it's been sitting there for 3 years.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that the places that are in the worst, I assume we want to make sure the sidewalks in the worst condition are where we're prioritizing the funding, not the sidewalks of the neighbors that are the most
Mr.
connected
Chair.
to the city.
And is this separate from the 50-50 split with owners? Because there's different areas. If it's in front of your house, it's 50-50 split. So is this separate from that 50-50 program?
Why don't we ask Jorge tomorrow.
Is it on now? Yep. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to clarify this portion. First, I would like to start with the fact that the maintenance of the sidewalks is the responsibility of the adjacent homeowner, as per code. All right. So we have two programs in the city to address maintenance and replacement of concrete of those sidewalks. First one is 50-50, that allows a homeowner to split the cost with the city when their sidewalk needs repairs. What you are looking at in this CIP application is for those areas that require immediate attention due to safety issues. This is not your regular crack on a sidewalk. This is a lifting sidewalk because of what is happening on the bottom, right? And so the homeowner may or may not have the ability to repair as per the responsibility, so the city will address it right away. So when we learn about those, we use these funds to repair that sidewalk. Furthermore, and I'm gonna let Mark add a little bit more information here on the inventory that you were talking about. Do we know where are these locations that need or will need attention based on how the damage is evolving? Yes, we do. And Mark, if you want to go ahead.
Mark Stevens, City Engineer. There's a couple different ways that we handle and approach this for the Public Way Concrete Program money. The windstorm money was separate. That was allocated by the council. As a result, all the windstorm items that were brought up and brought to our attention have been handled. The Public Way Concrete Program, we have done very similar to the OCI for roadway index. We've done an inventory across the city within the past couple of years of sidewalks and identified locations. We typically try and go worst first when it comes to ones that the city identifies. What Jorge spoke to with the 50-50 program, that is when homeowners with their adjacent sidewalk will say, hey, I've got, deteriorated concrete, and it's their responsibility. For these are items like for curb and gutter, where we have ponding issues, we have tree roots that have affected, raising, trip hazards. We will assess those, but across the city in all districts, it is something that it plagues the city with our urban forest, these kind of issues with the trees and what the tree roots do. So that is primarily how we handle that. If there's any risk management items that are brought to our attention from trip and falls, then we'll typically go out and prioritize those as well. So there's multiple ways in which we kind of assign, but another way that we'll go out is that we don't just go do a site, like 1 or 2 concrete panels. We will assess an area. So if there's a block face or a block, we will do multiple locations for efficiencies and cost. So it's not just one site, there's probably multiple sites. And so as a result, some of those that maybe weren't prioritized based upon worst first get done because they're adjacent to and in the proximity of all of the ones that are the worst first, if I'm kind of explaining that correctly.
That does make sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, council members, should we move on to the next item?
I don't want to get in the weeds on it, so maybe it's a light legislative intent. I would like us to revisit the 50% sidewalk ownership that's disproportionately burdensome to families who are income restricted.
Many years ago, the council actually allocated CDBG funding to fund the 50% portion that was the residents' responsibility within CDBG eligible areas. I think we would need to amend the CDBG plan to make that eligible, unless it's already there. Maybe it's already there.
I do think it would need to be amended, and some of the dormant CDBG funds that the council has talked about the last few months, one of the policy priorities that you gave to CAN was sidewalks. And so there is an amount that's going to be coming back to the council for a follow-up briefing, because you would have to amend the 1-year and the 5-year HUD plans to use the funding for those categories. So it'd be one-time money, but it could be an opportunity to add the funding for this use in this program.
So if the council was interested in that, that's an avenue.
So Jen, what you were explaining is that in CDBG eligible areas, the city covered 100%. Is that?
I guess a different way to phrase it is that the city covered the residents portion with CDBG and the city's portion with CIP. I think in both categories there wasn't enough funding to go around. So it's not that 100% of the needed sidewalk projects got done, but there were funding sources for both.
Didn't we add that in last year's CDBG? Because I remember talking with Cindy, and I think we actually might have done it last year.
I don't remember it being added to the plan because the plan's only updated every 5 years.
Okay.
But maybe we had a discussion about the possibility.
Yeah,
So
I remember this.
We could raise it. We could raise it again.
I'm very interested on this.
We are kind of getting into the weeds, but this 750 is not for the 50-50 program. This 750 is for the ones where it's a big enough problem that the city's just going to go do it.
Okay. That's why it's proactive.
Got it. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't mean to go backwards, but a quick question on the one before that. With the Virginia Street, we're checking to see how much more can be done in addition to 21st and Virginia Street, right? But those will definitely be covered.
Yeah, we're
Okay,
going to
thanks.
confirm if those will be prioritized because of the bond spending deadline.
Mark, do you have an answer already?
Thank you.
Do you have an answer immediately on that?
With respect to the timing or Virginia Street in perspective?
Does
in particular?
$3.3 million cover 21st and Virginia and others?
Yes. And so the others will be identified, but because of inflation costs, 2100 South, May, and Virginia Street will probably take up, I would imagine, the majority of that. And that's just what we've seen with inflationary costs and the consumer price index over the last
21 South
couple
Virginia
years.
Street and very small amount of additional road.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councilor Wharton?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So that takes us to number 7, which is the Livable Streets Traffic Calming Implementation Program. And attachment 9 has the map showing the individual zones that are done together. And it shows by number which ones have been funded and which ones would be funded with this additional funding. There's 113 zones. They're color coded by red, which are the most in need, versus blue, which are the least in need.
Great. Appreciate that. And this is, again, just as an aside, it would be great, just in order for us to communicate with our constituents. This is not the only line item for traffic calming in our budget. Could we, when there's time, which I know that's never, but like get a list of all the different ways we're funding traffic calming in the city? That would help me wrap my head around it and be able to communicate that. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
on this issue, and for some conversations that I had with some staff, I think this is obviously a bigger conversation as a policy question as far as neighbor-driven applications for street mitigation or speeding mitigation. There is the city put the effort in coming up with the areas that need the most, and created a map and created red areas and different categories of urgency on this. But then you have the parallel route where a neighbor in a different area outside these red areas could apply for this funding, and it could be potentially funded, which is fine. But maybe there is a discussion there. Could we prioritize funding especially for speeding mitigation or livable streets in areas that the city has already recognized to be the most needed for this funding,
I think
which it
that's-
will narrow it down. I guess this is a bigger conversation, but I want us to maybe start thinking about this. Not that we shouldn't be putting these funds across the board, but we're trying to tackle the biggest issue and the biggest areas, and we put the effort, that city administration put the effort on coming up with a study and recognizing these areas first. But sometimes we're pulling these funds to other sections.
And I
so
think to add to your comment, Councilmember Puig, not just the funding, maybe we can find funding for all of the ones that are red on our map or whatever, plus a couple others, but we're spreading out our staff time as well. So however long it would take, even if the money's available to do that. So I'm not opposed to that conversation at all. And I would tend to lean towards, let's do the ones that our data shows need it the most. Councilor Dugan, did you have a comment?
I think that would allow us maybe hopefully to finish some of those areas first, and then we can go down the list into the other colors. And they're less urgent, but hopefully we can get through the list faster, and there is a thought process and there is a plan that we're following. So it's almost redirecting some of the applications from the neighbors into some categories, or
I think
that's a conversation to be
I
had.
think that's a policy discussion that we can have, and I think if that's the direction we go, we should clarify with the community that this is how we're going to do traffic calming through this process, and the other process may not be worth your time. Does that make sense? Like if we have a data-driven approach to how we're going to prioritize these, then spending effort in that, because there are communities that have spent effort in that, and so we don't want to ignore that.
And I think this goes back to your first comment about the different ways, because we have those quick action plans and stuff like that. And I know transportation has a good view on how they want to do it. There's a lot of different funding sources, and I think it kind of dovetails into everything we're talking about here. It'd be just nice that everyone understands how we allocate it, who gets it, and what pot it comes out of, the quick reaction or number 7 here or some other pot of funding. So I agree with all that, and I think it'd be nice to have a good overview of the whole
We talked
process.
about this a lot when we were adopting the Livable Streets Master Plan, but it might be nice to have a briefing at some time in a near council meeting, just to how is it going?
Especially because we're going to open also CIP applications very soon. So it would be nice if we are going to have that discussion to have the discussion before, so we set the record straight if that's what the direction this council wants to go. And then, when neighbors are applying for the applications, there is some, process. Okay.
That's fair. Okay, someone took that note, right? We'll keep talking about traffic calming. That's never going away.
The next one is number 8, the neighborhood byways. And it's specific to construction of the West Point Jordan Meadows byway and design for a sugar house to University of Utah byway.
Okay, and that's fully funded in the current proposal.
Correct. Fully funded. Number 9 is complete streets for reconstruction projects.
And this one's mentioned sidewalks also.
Correct. When the city is reconstructing a street, the project will typically encompass the entire public right-of-way, so sidewalk to sidewalk. If there are slabs or curb and gutter that also need to be addressed for the efficiency and reducing disruption to the neighborhood, doing it all at once.
Makes sense.
So this is similar to what was, never mind, I answered my own question.
So that takes us to 10. This is the Poplar Grove Park full court basketball expansion. I believe there's currently a half court, so this would install a full-size basketball court. The public engagement for the community, this was one of the top requested sports and activities.
And this is a constituent application.
Okay.
Number 11, the Jordan Park and Peace Gardens Cultural Landscape Report and Master Plan. This is not recommended for funding.
Okay.
Number 12, the Cottonwood Park Trailhead and Parklet.
Okay.
What is the parklet? Sorry, I should maybe.
A small park.
Yep. Small park.
Okay. It's a baby park, pocket park. Okay, I know that one. Thank you.
13 is Three Creeks West Roadways Addendum. This one's also not recommended for funding. And then 14, Complete Streets Overlay. This is one that you see every year. So an overlay as opposed to reconstruction. Overlay is, 3 inches of asphalt, not a full reconstruction. And this one's recommended for partial funding.
So on number 14 and number 9, Complete Streets Reconstruction, Complete Streets Overlay, this is not talking about complete streets, or Complete Streets Ordinance. This is just talking about roads that are broken.
It's adding the Complete Streets elements to not just doing the overlay.
So
and
when
nothing
we're
else.
doing an overlay, okay, so the funding to do the overlay is separate. This is to do the Complete Streets pieces.
Historically,
like bike lanes
Yep.
painted on in
it's
addition
been funded
to the
separately
overlay.
historically, but they're moving toward funding them
Thank you.
jointly.
Okay. And so that's the same as number 9. This is the Complete Streets pieces of complete reconstructions that are funded elsewhere. Thanks.
And separate from the bond.
And separate from the bond. Now, could some of the number 9 go to the bond roads, though? No, never mind. I don't need the answer to that. Thanks. Okay, I think we're on 15 now.
Yep, 15 urban trails, and specifically a new urban trail that would serve the Other Side Village, the tiny home village, as well as the Wallace Stegner Academy, connecting them to Redwood Road and existing public transit, as well as a soon-to-be completed mobility hub at Orange Street, which is just past Redwood Road. Since these are new sidewalks, this might also be another opportunity to use some of the dormant CDBG funding. It would need to be included in updating those HUD plans. But this one and earlier, the Proactive Concrete Program, those are the two that might be a use for CDBG funds. Tammy in CAN is taking a closer look at this as an option.
Can I confirm, just because the word trail is used, are these actually the sidewalks that like Wallace Stegner has been waiting for since they were built? Or is it thank you, John, I see you're nodding.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not just like a separate trail that would be close but not quite what they need. Thank you.
I don't know what you're talking about, but it sounds like you got your answer.
Yes,
Okay.
it's important. It's an important piece. Yes.
Okay.
And so this will also
I trust you.
finish the end of the nine-line trail going west a little bit, because sort of the 9-line trail sort of dies, disappears. It becomes an
As
old
it follows the surplus canal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if this will take it like all the way along the surplus canal. We'd have to ask.
I will be very interested to know this, because I'm sure there will be a lot of questions from my neighbors about what
John
is-
Larson, Transportation Division.
Thank you.
Hello.
How far? I think the question is how far the $1.7 million for urban trails would extend the 9-line trail.
We hired a consultant. Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay. We're in the process of figuring all that out. We actually hired a consultant to do some of the planning and design to basically see how far we would be able to stretch whatever budget we get. But yeah, the top priority would be extending sidewalk along Indiana Avenue far enough west from Redwood Road to serve both the, it's called Bending River Road that the Wall Stegner Academy is on, and then also where the other side village is. And then if we can keep going further and start working on the surplus canal trail, then we will. But later this year, we'll be able to have that study complete. So we'll at least know what needs to be built and what it will look like.
And this 1.7 million will fund the study plus theoretically the construction of a.
The study was already funded.
Oh, the
from
study's already
previous-
funded. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
so it's already underway.
Got it.
So
Thanks.
So that's the good news. We'll be able to move pretty quick.
Mr. Chair, just to team up with Councilmember Petro, does the funding and clarification, does the funding also, or the study looks into Bending River Road, which is where Wallace Stagner sits on, just a little bit south of Indiana? Just want to make sure that that is part of because it will be frustrating for the patrons of Wallace Stagner to see all that improvement and then yet the sidewalk that they've been asking for 5 years not to happen.
So we can look at that. I thought there on the west side of the road that they did have sidewalk all the way down, but
No, there is just
So,
rocks.
On the
There's
east side, there is some that gets broken up. However, the case has been made repeatedly because of both the industrial and the carpooling traffic that there's no safe crossing. So using the sidewalk that's there actually imperils people even further. And then on the west side where the kids do have to walk, it is just goat heads. We walked there.
Very dangerous ones.
We walked there multiple times
Yes.
together and it was painful through shoes.
okay, I'll make sure that that's included in the study and design.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
So that takes us to 16, the Rose Park and Jordan River Recreation Hub. This one is not recommended for funding. Number 17 is the citywide park restroom planning study. And kind of a pilot, a test would be done at Fairmont Park. It is not recommended for funding.
I think I mentioned this too. I mean, my interest in something similar to this, to the restroom, to look into all the restrooms in the city and to do an assessment of what is needed. I mean, there is a lot of patrons to parks, sheltered and unsheltered, that uses them and they need them to be in functioning order. So this is something that I really be interested in.
And this 75,000 is for two pieces, a study citywide, and then one specific pilot design.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question would be, if this is an interest of Councilmember Pui, are those two things, can we delaminate those two things and just do the citywide study?
Yeah.
And, or do they need to happen at the same time? If that's an interest, I would want to know, do we have to fund it all or could we do partial?
We can get the cost breakout. And I remember the applicant shared examples of similar studies that were done. I think it was Denver and Pittsburgh and maybe Portland. But if you wanted to see examples of similar studies, we have those.
Okay. I'm not opposed to looking at that.
Okay. That takes us to number 18, Madsen Park improvements. This one is not recommended for funding, but a note, this is one of the District 2 neighborhood parks identified to receive funding from the first issue, or from the Parks Bond.
Got it. Okay.
Number 19, Fire Station number 7. This is over by the State Fair Park. It is tennis and pickleball court restoration and adding additional amenities. It is recommended for funding.
Are these public courts?
Yes.
At the fire station?
There's a lot of neighbors that will be very excited about this. Very, very excited.
It's gonna make everyone's ear. But did you see the New York Times article about the noise?
Or Stansbury Park.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good. And that one is funded, recommended for full funding.
Yes, full funding on that one.
Thank you.
Fun.
Number 20 is the 337 Park development. And this is recommended for full funding. It would be a community garden. Or it was initially a community garden. But because of the development on either side, it's really limited the sun that has access to those plants and has made the community garden more difficult to be successful.
Where is this?
So this one is between, do you know where Urban Crossroads Center is?
Crossroads Urban Center?
So Crossroads Urban Center, and then there's a bunch of
There's more
development in
than one
between.
location,
So
though.
it's like this hidden little park in there that the city bought it apparently in 2015. And it became a garden, like you said. There was some public art in 2017 done there, but it's not super visible. Like, I mean, you have to turn.
It's like partly in the interior of the block.
Yeah, in the interior of the
What's
block.
the approximate address?
337 South, 400 East.
400 East, okay.
Yeah, right now, when you look at the Google pictures, you'll see construction zone over it, essentially.
Sorry, with the new building being constructed next to Crossroads Urban Center, which is like 2 feet, how do you get into it?
It's on that.
Oh, on the other
It's
side.
on the other side.
Okay.
The Pocket Park has street frontage, right?
No.
I think it's just a tiny like access, but most of it is closer to the interior of the block.
And this was recommended by our Parks Division, Ben? Okay.
Okay.
So that takes us to 21, Rose Park Lane beautification, trail, and safety improvements. This one is not recommended for funding. Councilmember Petro spoke at the first briefing last month about wanting to partially fund this, $30,000 for the driver feedback signs.
I think we also need to pay attention to the rest of the request. I don't think with the competing priorities right now, I can push it as far, but between the lack of the sound barrier there, which is not our responsibility, but I've now been rejected for twice, I think, so each rejection I view as progress towards the ultimate goal. But the neighbors there are living under significant duress, plus we have an upcoming land use request to densify in that area, to do a high-density project. So I do think this needs to stay on our radar, and we need to be strategic about how we approach it. And the concerns raised here are really valid. I just have a hard time prioritizing it among all the other competing priorities right now.
Thanks, Councilmember Petro.
We already talked about that during budget, and we found 35 to put the responsive speed limit signs up.
I don't think it was funded in the annual budget, but it was expected to be part of the additional funding the council added to CIP.
Yeah, we're gonna split the feedback signs.
Yes. And so I think it was 35,000.
Signs that like tell you how fast you're going.
Yes.
Has the speed limit, and then it tells you how fast you're actually going. Okay.
Yep.
So we do need to have some funding, but not the 840.
I think right now us doing the feedback signs is a good first step, because we definitely do need to address the issue there. But with all the development coming there, it feels as though we're going to have an organic reason to assess and evaluate. And so once we know what this land use request happening up at the Hunter Stables area is going to be, we'll have a better context. I would hate us to commit this and then realize this doesn't make sense with other things we have to do to develop up there.
So my question is, I thought that in our Livable Streets master plan, the responsive feedback signs were part of the toolkit that we adopted. Is that true? So I'm seeing a yes nod. So it is when we funded those big other chunks of Livable Streets implementation money in different parts, including in this CIP, I believe, right? Does that include responsive feedback signs, or would we need to add additional ones to accomplish this what is a relatively small request for responsive feedback signs in whatever spot?
I think it works either way.
Do you know, does the question make sense? I'm sorry, I didn't state that very clearly.
To repeat the question, could the driver feedback signs be funded out of the quick intervention funding? Could it be funded out of the Livable Streets funding, or does it need to have separate dedicated CIP funding? And I
That's
think
the question. Thank you, Ben.
it could work any of the three ways.
Yeah, that's correct. So it probably, like in this case, it probably makes the most sense for the to pull it out of the quick action funding.
Out of the quick action funding?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, if you want to add additional funding, we'll take it and use it always.
So I guess my and that quick action funding is sufficiently flexible to, like, for Councilman Petro to say, here's the spots where we would like to try this idea, and we could
As long as
get the
we,
community to whatever back that in.
as long as we can commit this signal to this constituent that we heard them and get this, I don't care what it comes from, I just need the commitment that we're going to do it here. Whether that funding stream is from Livable Streets or a special allocation.
So just so we remember the conversation, we had this conversation on the unresolved issues conversation, and briefly, Councilmember Petro, you said the same thing that you said right now is, we want to indicate to these neighbors that we are being heard, but we also need to wait for a lot of pieces to be finished. And we were discussing how much those signs cost, and we were going to allocate some money for those signs. At least we talked about the possibility of allocating some money for the signs, and I sort of sneaked under the rug in there, and I requested also 2 for those. For District 2, 2 additional signs. So it was 2 for District 1 and 2 for District 2. And Councilmember Petro wants them most likely to be in that area as a sign to those neighbors.
Okay, so are you, I guess for my purposes, I'm comfortable with the money we've already allocated to those 2 programs, that those 4 signs could be accommodated. I'm also open to adding more money to that. If you're saying you want us to appropriate it in such a way that it could only go to those 4 spots, that's maybe one more layer of discussion that I would want to have. But I think that the program already is sufficiently flexible for individual constituents and or council members to work with the department to figure out.
My only concern is I just don't want it to get diluted and for us to add money to a pot and then for these particular locations to be overlooked. Whatever way we want to do it, I'm in support of, as long as these spots get the attention they need.
Okay.
We'll do it however you want.
However you want, as long as you do this.
We need to decide that. Sure.
We'll make sure it happens one way or the other.
Okay. All right, so I'm putting a question mark by this. Yeah. Okay, number 22.
Number 22, Richmond Park Community Playground. And this one is not recommended for funding. Like Madsen Park, this is a district neighborhood park that is identified to receive funding from the Parks Bond.
Thanks, Ben.
However, hold on. In the staff report, it says Okay, 212,000 is eligible from park impact fees, but that's only for a new amenity because they have a playground, they have somewhat of amenities there. So, and then, but it's been just as a reminder. Like, would you refresh my memory, Ben? Like, so if it's funded, or some funding is going through the general obligation bond, can we use those funds for the replacement of the playground, for example? Okay.
Yeah, the bond funding
Is more flexible.
is more flexible
More
than
flexible,
impact
okay.
fees. There's definitely overlap. You can do some of the same projects, but the bond funding is usually a little more flexible.
Okay. And do you remember more or less how much that was?
From the bond,
Yeah.
so it's 1.5 million per district,
For the-
approximately, since not every park has the same need. So since I think there were 2 locations, Topher Park and
Topher
Richmond
and
Park,
Richmond, right.
assuming you split the 1.5 million, it'd be 750,000 to Richmond Park.
Okay.
We
All right.
didn't make it that clear though, right? I thought we gave the department a little bit of flexibility to,
That's why I said approximately
Okay,
1.5 million per district. It will shift.
things.
Right.
I just wanted that on the record that it wasn't exactly that number.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
The next one is number 23. This is Rose Park Lane Open Space and Trail Connection Study. It is not recommended for funding. And this is just up the road and across the street from the Rose Park Lane one we discussed a minute ago.
As long as we know that Rose Park Lane is coming up for us, if we want to develop up there with high density, this stuff is going to have to be addressed. But I agree that it's not the time or place for it.
And this is part of North Point?
No, it sits just east of 215. The North Point area is west of 215. So it's over where the Regional Athletic Complex, the RAC, is.
Okay.
And it's that road that connects them back down into the city.
Thanks.
And it looks like a service road along 215.
If it's a helpful landmark, the Regional Athletic Complex, these 2 CIP projects in Rose Park Lane are immediately south of the RAC.
Thanks.
There is significant housing development just south of there, so it's a little bit of an awkward spot because it feels industrial and like we're getting into rural, but there's also suburban. So the residents are right to be stressed and want responsiveness. Just knowing what I know is on the horizon, I just don't think this is what we should be prioritizing. It's going to be a priority because of the development
So
coming.
the issue is that the street itself is a dirt road?
No, the street itself, it probably needs some attention. Jorge and his team would probably know better, but it definitely isn't going to fit the capacity for the density that we're talking about with some of the projects coming up. We're going to have to probably develop another connector back to Redwood Road at some point. There's going to need to be sidewalks. There currently is just like,
Okay,
grass is
so-
growing over it. Like, there's just not a lot of attention
These
paid to the
new
area.
apartments that are going in
They're
would
not.
be paying streets impact fees, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Unless they are low income affordable.
unless they're exempt from impact fees, okay. But theoretically, that type of additional density in a neighborhood
Right.
could pay for the need for improved infrastructure through impact fees. I mean, I say theoretically loosely, but
You're correct.
theoretically is not.
That is a plausible path.
Which is
Okay.
why I'm okay with us not doing these now because of those sorts of things. But we do need to prioritize it as we rezone and develop because it does need attention.
Okay.
I think we're on 24.
Yes.
Which is Jefferson Park improvements. And this one is recommended for full funding.
Jefferson Parks and Ballpark. I believe that one was also part of the GEO bond funding. Can I get a little bit of clarification about, do we need both sources of funding to do what we're wanting to do in Jefferson Park, and or how, if that's duplicative?
I think you're right. I'm double checking.
Tyler, do you want to?
It was Jefferson Park and Ida Cotton Park in District 5.
Yeah, yes. It is identified as one of the reimagined neighborhood parks for your district. I think at this time we would love to see both funding sources. It would give us greater flexibility and significant improvements there. This CIP request has been a constituent request for several years and is primarily looking at trail reconstruction around the park.
Around the perimeter.
Yeah, around the perimeter with
And the
lighting. which would
GEO
be-
bond money would be for different types of improvements.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, I also have constituents that have continued to ask about First Encampment Park, and I think their request is relatively small.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering would it ruin Jefferson Park if we diverted a little bit to First Encampment? Maybe you could give me a little bit of information on their request and how that could fit in, and
Yeah.
what that would be. I want Jefferson Park to happen, and I want Jefferson Park to be as good as we can get it. But if there's two different sources of funding and we're getting quite a bit into Jefferson Park, I wouldn't be opposed to peeling a little bit off, because I think it was only like $150,000 they were asking for First Encampment Park.
Yeah.
In order to get that to spread over there as well, if that's feasible.
It could be. We have met with them recently, and most of the items that they've included in their past CIP application, maintenance related, so would not be bond eligible.
I see. Okay.
They also would not be impact fee eligible.
It wouldn't be bond or impact fee eligible.
It's maintenance.
Okay.
Correct.
I
It's not
see.
replacement of an asset, so it is maintenance. And so we are exploring options from a maintenance standpoint on how we can accommodate those requests.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
I think that takes us to number 25. This is Parks Bilingual Signage Installation, and it is recommended for funding. And this funding would go specifically to 10 parks, so it would not meet the need for wayfinding signage and multilingual signage citywide, but it does prioritize 10 of the city's larger, most popular parks.
That's fully funded.
I believe so.
Great.
26, the Fair Park Traffic Circle construction phase. This is on 10th West and 5th North. It is recommended for full funding. And this is one the council had talked about in CIP last year as funding the study. This is construction.
That's why it sounds so familiar.
Right.
Like, are we doing this again? Wait, didn't we? Okay, got it.
Great.
27, the North Temple Arts and Tourism District improvements. This one is not recommended for funding. It would be centered around the intersection of the Folsom Trail and 8th West.
Okay.
So this is only from the area between the Folsom Trail and 8th West? I thought it was a little
It's a
long.
few blocks in each direction from that intersection.
Oh, okay, I see. When we discussed this, and again, I didn't dug in too deeply on it when we were talking about this during unresolved issues, but this is something that it is an important corridor for the whole city, but it's an important piece of the west side, and there is a lot of obvious struggles on North Temple, and any activation of any form and any amount of money that could give us something there, I'm very supportive of. I would like to see if there is a little breakdown of that $495,111, if there is a way of maybe funding parts of this or a beginning of something. So I will be interested to see a little more breakdown on that.
Okay, we'll get a breakdown.
I have a constituent too who is a bike. He primarily uses bike for transit, and has had difficulty using the Folsom Trail because of a variety of issues, including people driving on it. And so anything that we can do to reclaim the intended purpose of the Folsom corridor would potentially be a really great investment for us to make sure that that new investment we've made doesn't inadvertently get to a state that requires remediation eventually. You know, can just, right now we can reclaim it through some basic usage. We wouldn't have to do too much intense work.
This is another project that has some overlap with the Parks Bond. There's $5 million for completing the Folsom Trail and adding in amenities that were removed when it was constructed due to cost increases. And I think the full $5 million is included in the first issuance of the Parks Bond. So it's possible some of this could be implemented with the Parks Bond funding, but not all of it is eligible for bond funding.
And that would be for the portion on the Folsom Trail, but this could be a little more focused on the North Temple part.
And 8th West.
On 8th West,
Yeah.
yes. And, you know, there is a piece there that I've been very interested in, which is the public art idea on North Temple to try to, and it's part of the description, but that was something that I believe it will change in a positive way, North Temple. But yeah, a breakdown will be very useful for me.
There's 5 different elements within this, but I don't have a cost for each one yet, so I'll get that.
Okay. Should we go on to number 28?
Number 28, this is becoming an annual item in CIP for alleyway improvements.
Stop blushing.
I just need you all to understand that alleyways are not evenly distributed throughout the city, so y'all don't get all the calls that I do about all the deteriorated alleyways. So this is very important.
It is recommended for full funding. Number 29. This is Fire Station Number 1, Apparatus Bay Extension. This is a major renovation to allow larger, modern fire engines and trucks to fit in the bays. When the facility was constructed, the vehicles that were used by the fire department were smaller and the call volume was lower. So this location now has bays that are smaller than the modern vehicles, and they've basically outgrown the facility because of the call volume that they're responding to. And it is recommended for full funding. Number 30, this is an item the council sees every year in CIP, the Facilities Asset Renewal Plan. Facilities has a 10-year plan to get all city facilities out of deferred maintenance. The cost is significant. It would take all of CIP almost. So instead of fully funding the $45 million need, the division comes to the council each year saying, here are the priority life and safety needs, and then energy efficiency needs, and then lower needs. So the annual funding first goes to those life and safety, and then it goes down the priority list to the facilities based on the ranking.
Okay, but the wording of this says Facilities Asset Renewal Plan, but this is implementation of the plan that's already been done.
Yes.
This 1.7 is not a plan. It's working.
It's not static. It's updated based on the facility's condition.
But this gets us projects. This is not. We're not
It's
funding
not a plan.
$1.7 million study.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
improvements to buildings. Number 31, you may remember this from the annual budget because it had an ongoing component in public services for the supplies and materials. This is the one-time purchase of the equipment. So it's a mill and overlay maintenance pilot program. The department currently rents these vehicles. This would be to purchase it. So you already approved $130,000 for the supplies in the annual budget. This is to purchase 2 vehicles. And it's a step in between, it's above a pothole, below an overlay. Yep. The next one, number 32. This is Sugar House Safe Side Streets, Part 2. It's a traffic calming constituent application that was partially funded 3 years ago. It was not recommended for funding in the last cycle, and the constituent has continued to reapply. So the designs have been done. This is to implement the traffic calming recommendations at 6 cross streets in the Sugar House area.
How, Mr. Chair, sorry. Sorry, I just,
Go ahead.
just to team it up with my previous question, and I guess an additional question, how much money did we spend on the study? I don't want that to go to waste in part, but I also, on the second part of my question, and it goes back to my previous point on this, does this overlap with any of the areas that the city have recognized to be priorities for this sort of investment? And if so, how far or high in the need scale do they fall into? So yeah, those are my questions.
Is this just traditional traffic calming, like what would be done through livable streets? Or is this, okay.
It was $153,000 in the study that was done previously.
I want to mention that I believe before she left, Councilmember Fowler said that this was a high priority to her. So we currently don't have a District 7 council member, but we will in 2 days.
Yeah.
So let's just put that on the record that this is something that we should ask that new council member for.
Yep.
Input on.
And I'll let John, did you have any comments? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I just thought maybe it was worth mentioning that, especially with the construction on Highland Drive and the pending or soon to be construction on 21st South, and considering that this is near where there's some concern about some spillover traffic during the construction. So we did some quick action stuff on these streets. We're still testing what they'll look like, and we've really liked your idea of the painting them the Salt Lake City blue, but we did put some of those big concrete planters on some of these streets, some of the more critical ones. So I just thought that was worth mentioning, and perhaps even might be worth looking at something permanent, just because of they still have a few more years of construction that they have to live through. So we're just really sensitive to that.
Thanks, John. Okay.
That takes us to number 33, the historic restoration, replacement, and conservation work at the International Peace Gardens. And this is recommended for full funding. The next one, number 34, is actually just across the river from the Peace Gardens, the Fred and Isla Rose Wetland Preserve improvements. That one is not recommended for funding.
What side is that on? Is it the south side or north?
It's just east of the gardens. It's across the street from the Sandy Anderson Senior Center on the 9-9 trail.
It's where the river makes like this giant curve.
Where you have to.
And it's right behind also, it continues right.
That where you have to turn right on the 9 line?
Yeah.
Or you turn left to go to.
Yeah, there's the barber shop in the corner too.
Okay.
And
And
behind
the
it,
Panaderia.
Okay.
there is a little bit of a wetlands. It's actually an incredible place if you don't know. I mean, I'm talking about you.
We've ridden through it on our bikes, but I don't think I've ever realized it's actually a wetland that
Yeah.
we're preserving.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
That takes us to number 35, a traffic signal replacement. This particular signal is 75 years old, not the oldest in the city. Yep. And every year in CIP, there's requests to replace traffic signals. Ideally, the city would replace, I think, 4 a year. We typically don't fund it at that level.
It's $400,000 for one signal.
No, if you weigh and wish.
Oh my gosh.
I don't think it's one signal as one intersection, so the multiple signals with different
But
directions.
it's $400,000 for one intersection. That sounds like a lot.
I think so. Yeah. But it might last another 75 years.
Okay.
Next is 36.
It's been working for 75 years. I don't know why we need to replace it, if you ask me.
That's how long we've had electricity, so it's pretty good.
I mean, that's impressive. Just saying.
The Park Strip median irrigation and water reduction strategy implementation. So this is multiple park strips and medians at different locations around the city, and it would be irrigation and water conservation at those different locations. It is not recommended for funding. The next one, 37, Liberty and Jordan Parks greenhouses. 2 different greenhouses, one at Liberty, one at Jordan. They're both quite large. They're both used year-round by public lands to propagate and create the plants that are then used in public lands throughout the city. This is not recommended for funding.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I mean, I know that the greenhouse, I'm sure same thing with the Liberty one, but the one in Jordan Parks is a key piece for the Peace Gardens, where they grow a lot of the plants that end up going on the Peace Gardens. I wonder if this will bring us problems in maintaining the Peace Gardens and keeping it as beautiful as it is right now. So just more questions about the impact of not funding this in the long term of the Peace Gardens, because the Peace Gardens without those beautiful plants, it will be a very bad thing.
I think, am I understand? I believe that this was a constituent request, and they were asking to do it. This was for a study. This is not actually maintenance. This is a study that would redesign the buildings to be used for different types of things, like events and activities and programming and things like that. Which I was just going to mention that it's not something that I feel compelled to find funding for in this year's budget, but those buildings are actually really cool inside, and it could be an opportunity for us to create something really special inside of those 2 parks. So yes to Councilor Pui's question about it, are we at risk of not being able to grow plants that we need, but also it is a really cool asset that we have that is deteriorating quickly, and it could be a beautiful venue inside our parks. It looks like Tyler has a quick response to that.
Yeah, happy to respond to that. With regards to Jordan Park Greenhouse, we don't use the greenhouse to grow the plants that are in International Peace Gardens. We store them there. So it is a storage problem that we would have. As for Liberty Park, same thing for Liberty Park. For a lot of our annual plants that we have at Liberty Park, we have been expanding our native plant program significantly and using the Liberty Park greenhouses. So we need a lot of work at Liberty Park, but we are exploring partnerships right now with the University of Utah and the State Prison to utilize their greenhouses to expand our programs as well.
Interesting. Thanks.
Next is First Encampment Park, number 38, which we talked about earlier and is not recommended for funding, but might be able to use existing parks maintenance budget to address some of the need.
Great. I'd love to follow up with Parks about that, maybe at another time.
Where is it? At
17th South and 5th East, I believe. I think we're at the scheduled time if we're wanting to stay on schedule. We have another CIP briefing Tuesday, next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
So why don't we hold there? Well, actually, I just want to flip through. The rest of them are not recommended for funding until the last page. Is that
correct?
No. Yes, the very last page.
West
So-
Side.
Actually, why don't we just go through the last 3 that are recommended for funding, and then we can pick up on Tuesday with the rest of them that are not.
Okay.
Does that sound okay to council members?
Yeah.
So do the last page right now.
Just jump to the last page, and then we'll remember to do the.
So that's number 59, the West Side Art Project. It's $150,000, and it could go anywhere on the west side. This could be combined with or be separate from the other $150,000 in the RDA 9-line project area. The other two items, number 60, maintenance of vacant city-owned property that I mentioned in the intro, where there's funding from last fiscal year available, and this is a request for $500,000 additional funding.
So we already have $500,000 from last time that hasn't been used. This is in addition to it, so we could actually not fund this, and it's because we have funding from the last years to fund this.
It's $600,000 remaining from last year. You probably want to leave some funding because there's always something unexpected that comes up with vacant property. But there might be a chance to use some of these funds elsewhere, but we would want to check with real estate services.
Wait, I thought I heard you earlier say that the previous funding hasn't been spent yet, but is already allocated to specific projects which are listed here.
Which are listed, and it's enough to fully fund those projects.
But this requested 500,000 and recommended 500,000. Is that for the same projects? It's different projects.
It's new
right?
funding, and it doesn't have specific projects identified at this time.
So I think to clarify, we could not do this, and these listed ones would still be funded. But there is a whole list of other things that would potentially be a problem that we still probably need this funding for, right?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chair, I mean, there are some issues in some of, especially, for example, in my district, PSB, it's been sitting there vacant for a long time, and there are fee process going slow, and it's been redone apparently. But regardless of what we do with that property, it needs a lot of maintenance, and that's something that I've been working on with the administration. But that's an example of city property owned that we need to take care of. We have a lot of ordinances where we ask the public to take care of their properties, take care of the sidewalks, etc., and the park strips. And this is one that I feel that it needs a lot of help, and we need to lead by example. So
Okay.
I would like to revisit that one for sure.
Okay.
You.
So it is recommended right now.
Yeah.
Okay, but maybe perhaps we need more.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like 500,000, like cool, but I think we have more need than that. I'm sure they can use
So I guess
more.
the question is that actually, what does that get us, and what do we need? So follow-up question on that. Is that all right, Ben?
We do have an answer. It's on page 3 of the staff report. The $100,000 of the former public safety building. It would include repairing the existing gate, a new motorized gate which would control access to Magnolia parking, the permanent supportive housing next door. And then it would have improvements to the park strip, landscaping maintenance, and cleanup, including bio-waste cleanup, as well as car towing and disposal.
Okay.
I would like to know what the oldest still operating traffic light is in Salt Lake City. I can go back to that for a minute.
We've moved on.
Because, you may not know this, the first electric traffic signal was in Salt Lake City on Main Street and 2nd South. Yes. So it's not that one, because that one was made of wood.
Oh.
So that one's gone.
That's where we lost Councilmember Warren in the last but it's
He's
actually
still on the
very
old traffic
interesting.
lights.
I love this.
I really wanted to bring it up, so.
Thanks for that
Salt Lake
tidbit.
trivia for you, but I would like to know what the oldest one is, if it's not 75 years old.
According to Tom Millar, 88 years old is the oldest in the
barely
city.
told
Where
you
is
that
it?
already.
I don't know where.
Okay.
We'll ask.
That is something he would know off the top of his head. Okay, the last one is urban trails maintenance, which is for a variety of trails, it looks like.
And this one, there's a few line items in CIP that don't go through the competitive process. They're base funding for maintenance.
Right.
There's some for parks, some for facilities. This is a new one. So that's why we called it out and added it to the funding log, and why it didn't go to the advisory board. So this would be $200,000 for maintenance of urban trails. So 9 Line, Folsom, McClelland, as well as some of the new ones that were discussed today, like over by Wallace Stegner Academy. So this would be every year $200,000 available to go to maintenance of any urban trails in the city. So that's flexibility that's delegated to the administration. We can always call it out each year if you want to consider it with all the other CIP projects, but because it's new, we wanted to highlight it.
I see what you're saying. I mean, I think it's necessary. We're putting a lot of money into our trails, and if we don't fund maintenance, then we're gonna regret that. Okay. A bathroom break has been requested, so let's end this until next Tuesday, take a 5-minute break, and then come back to item number 3. Oh my gosh, we're only on 3. reconvene. We're now on item number 3. Thanks for letting us have that quick break. Item number 3, zoning map amendment at 754 South State Street. Brian Fulmer from Council Policy Analyst Staff will give us an update, and then Amanda Roman will give us the briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a proposal to amend the zoning map for 10 parcels at the address you mentioned from their current D2 or Downtown Support District zoning to D1, which is Central Business District. The former Sears department store was located on this site. Intermountain Health owns the property and stated they would like to construct an urban hospital on the site. Hospitals are not allowed on either D1 or D2 zoning, and the request also includes a text amendment that would allow hospitals and ambulance services as permitted uses in the D1 zoning district. The petitioner is here and would like an opportunity after Amanda does her presentation to address the council. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi. Thank you. All right. Intermountain Health, the property owner, is requesting a zoning map amendment for the property at 752 South State Street to change the zoning from D2 Downtown Support District to D1 Central Business District. As Brian mentioned, there are 10 parcels and the property is approximately 9 acres in size. And if the amendments are approved, the property owner intends to build an urban hospital on this site. Next slide, please. The second portion of the request is to amend the downtown district's land use table and add the following uses as conditional within the D1 zoning district. Ambulance services, both indoor and out, they have the same definition as listed below, and then a hospital, including accessory lodging facility. To note, the applicant originally requested these uses to be permitted, but the Planning Commission forwarded a recommendation that they be conditional. Next slide, please. Here's a zoning map. The D2 zone is about a block away from all of the zones that, or all of the properties zoned D1. So while it's not exactly, it's only half a block away, so while it's not adjacent, it's very near the downtown business district. Next slide, please. Planning staff had the following considerations when reviewing the zoning map and text amendments. The proposed, if it meets our general plan policies in both downtown plan and Plan Salt Lake, the development potential of the property and compatibility with adjacent properties. The proposed amendments are aligned with the general principles and strategies as identified in Plan Salt Lake. The plan recognizes that the neighborhood is becoming more urbanized and is perceived as the backbone of the county, so growth is expected and appropriate. And the proposed rezone would allow for denser development and taller buildings than what the plan envisions for the South State neighborhood, but the zoning designation would support the initiatives as outlined in the plan. Higher impact development is expected, and then new development should use existing infrastructure when possible. If a hospital is built on this site, the property owner and developer would need to provide new off-site water, sewer, and stormwater quality improvements. For the development potential, the D2 zoning district has a maximum building height of 120 feet with design review approval. If the downtown building heights amendments are adopted tonight, I'll just speak to those, then the by right zoning, or the by right height in the D1 zoning district would be 200 feet, and with no height limitation with design review approval. It is expected that the applicant would come back once they have their development plans and ask for additional building height through the design review process. And then the third thing is we review the compatibility with adjacent properties. The subject property is unique. It is within multiple community council boundaries, and the community councils had a joint meeting and submitted a letter regarding the proposal.
The site is within the Ballpark Community Council boundary, but it is within the downtown plan. As mentioned before, compatibility, the downtown area is expected to continue to expand to approximately 900 south, and the proposed rezone is compatible with the development to the north and represents how the community envisions the expansion of the downtown neighborhood. And next slide, please. And to wrap it up, earlier this year, the Planning Commission voted 7-3 to forward a positive recommendation to the council to amend the zoning map for the subject properties, and then also to add the uses as requested as conditional within the D1 zoning district. And I'm available for any questions, and the applicant is also here.
Council members, any questions before we invite the applicant up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions in general focus on street activation on State Street. I know that this is looking into a hospital, a facility, and I haven't seen many hospitals that do, at least in Utah, they do a lot of street activation. They usually have very large setbacks, or they are on top of a mountain or something like the University of Utah, right? But it is very important to me personally to see, and I see the potential of State Street as a big corridor to the state, and that street that invites everybody and everybody will go to, and I'm worried that this will be a Sears block again, and on the State Street face, a wall, maybe some plants or whatnot. I'm sure it's going to be prettier than that, but my concern is the activation and the lack thereof on that street. So that is something that I'm very focused on. Obviously, I don't have necessarily issues with the use and with the intent and with the height and with all of that. I personally don't have issues with that, and I'm very supportive of the plan. But to me, State Street should be activated. And I'm not talking about, when I talk about activation, and I mentioned this before, I'm not talking about a gym or or something like that. I'm talking about in and out people, things that attract people to the sidewalk and activate that street face.
I share that priority, but I want to expand and say that I think it's not just State Street that matters. Main Street is on the other side, and all of the streets there are really becoming, that whole district is really becoming hopefully becoming a walkable. There's some of the best restaurants and all sorts of things, development is happening in that area. So for me, it's not just State Street that matters for street activation. It would be all of them. Any other questions before we invite the applicant up? Dugan? Okay.
I'll wait for the applicant.
I think we give, the applicant is here. So if you want to come up, you have 5 minutes and you can speak to this application.
I'm Tyler Buswell. Awesome. Can you hear me now? Great. Thanks. Tyler Buswell, attorney at Curtin McConkie, and represent Intermountain Health. With me, I have Heather Wall. She's the CEO and hospital administrator for the area where this hospital will go. And I also have Bentley Pay, who is the senior real estate director for Intermountain Health. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bentley to run through some slides and give just a short presentation.
See if this is already pushed. Thank you for being here, allowing us to be here with you and your time. We really appreciate it and are excited about the project and look forward to answering any questions that you have. We'll be very brief within the 5 minutes and make sure we answer your questions. Did you have how do we advance next slides. And I'll skip a few slides because the staff did such a great job with their write-up. Thank you, Amanda. Just a little bit of background. Sorry, you just go one slide back. sort of why we picked this site, it might be helpful to understand. When we were planning for a potential urban hospital here, we were looking for access for our patients easily off the freeway. Really excited about the new track stops that was there on the kitty corner there, so that patients could access the facility via tracks as well. Also, prioritizing a place where physicians wanted to practice and work. In an urban setting, it was difficult to find that much acreage. For some context, a lot of our hospitals are around 40 acres. This one sits on about 9, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But to find a single transaction where we could buy that much space at one time inside the urban district was really important for us. And then having the city support of wanting to bring an urban hospital to Salt Lake City. The next slide. And then we can skip this one. And this one, I think the staff report covered this. And then Heather, if you want to talk a little bit about the community impact for our patients.
Would love to. So the rationale Bentley explained very well as to why that consideration for that downtown location, the 2 freeway exits. But the other element is the adjacency and the accessibility to the airport. So one of the things that this group might not know is that we've got a phenomenal balance in our downtown hospitals of providing extraordinary care to the individuals that are right there in our downtown area. And we've had the opportunity to serve 49 out of the 50 states last year in people traveling to Utah for healthcare. And so creating a really accessible location was important, making sure we were in an area that had access to hotels, that had access to restaurants was really important. Also an area that could accommodate the fact that we will have over 1,700 caregivers that will be traveling to the downtown area for work on any given 24-hour period, as it is a 24-hour operation. And so that location was ideal in that we would have the ability to have that freeway accessibility, but also the ability to assure a great location for care. One of the things that was also really important to our caregivers and our patients was the ability to access public transit. Right now, most of our facilities are it's difficult. It takes a tracks stop as well as 2 bus transfers to get to where either patients need to be or the caregivers that are caring for them need to be. And so the accessibility of the bus line, the accessibility of that tracks line, and the ability to go north, south, and from the airport made this area something that was extraordinarily attractive from a hospital-based perspective. And I'll pause there.
Thank you, Heather. And then I think the last 2 comments before we answer any questions, the question here about street activation and community engagement. We've spent a lot of time over the last several months since we acquired the property, meeting with the business districts and their meetings. The letter that Amanda referenced talked a lot about street activation, permeability, and we certainly recognize that this site is going to be very different than anything Intermountain has built in the state. Like I said, they're on 40, 70, 100 acre parcels. This will be an urban hospital. It's going to look and feel very different. So keenly aware of that street activation. We can talk more about that if you have specific questions on it, but we are engaged with the community on those concerns and certainly want to address it. And it's important to us that we blend into what is in the urban context and how the property flows. And frankly, that allowing it to go to D1 facilitates some of those things. We can go higher and allows for that kind of activation and permeability.
I guess maybe a more specific question. Is it possible in an urban hospital with a zone that allows unlimited height for the first one, at least one, if not 1 or 2 floors, to not be part of the hospital, to be leased to businesses that could activate the street frontage in a way that a hospital typically would not? Obviously, you need some ingress and egress. You need your ambulances to come in and out. But is it possible for that first level, given that this change allows unlimited height, does that work in an urban hospital? Can you design it in a way that first level isn't any hospital uses almost at all?
Do you want to hit that or you want me to?
No, you go ahead and then I'll answer.
If you were to say none at all, I think that would be very difficult. But when you look at cities like Seattle, when you look at cities like New York, they actually have phenomenal street accessibility to services that serve both the people inside the hospital and outside of the hospital, coffee shops, 24/7 pharmacies, other areas like that that have to be on that first floor because we expect individuals to come from the street in to utilize those services, but also come from the backside where they're coming out of the hospital, out of the clinic. So I would suggest that it would be difficult to do it in its entirety, but our expectation is that we're creating an area that it really draws the community in, because that's what a hospital's for, is being that center for individuals who need care. And so we would like them to feel comfortable during the workday, stopping by the campus as well, as in addition to if they need emergent services on campus.
Okay. Council members?
I just have
Sorry. To me, that's, you know, I don't have any issues with the height. I don't have any issues with the purpose, with the goal. I love the urban setting, but to me, that would be a deal breaker. Not having a street activation, and at some level, obviously the internal parts of the building. But I'm talking about the front edge, of the building that activates the street, that brings people in, customers of yours, and also, if I want to grab a coffee, and that to me is very important. And we have seen worst case scenarios in our city and in other cities, and you can have the most amazing building, but then the street will be, the sidewalk will be dead, and that's really what I want us to avoid in this thing. So to me, that really is the only thing that I struggle with, and it seems like you guys are open to look into this very seriously.
And I can speak a little bit more to that. Just as we've been following very closely since last fall the proposed downtown building height and street activation text, right? Which we understand that the purpose of that is to have retail and other uses by the public. Potentially some open space, all of those things. We understand that to get the additional height, we're going to have to go through the design review process. We understand that. We've been following that. We've been supportive of that because the truth is we wanted to do that anyways. And so once that passed, that makes a ton of sense for us. But right now, we're just sort of looking at, can we get these approvals so then we can really begin the design review process. So we appreciate the comments, and we understand that, and that is certainly in our plan.
I think my follow-up question probably for staff, I don't know, council staff or maybe Amanda or planning staff, would be, would there be some sort of tool that we could implement here, such as a development agreement that would maybe go beyond what we're doing? And is the downtown building heights ordinance that we're re-adopting or whatever we're doing, is that adequate, or is this something that we can, is there some way that we can go a little bit beyond that and make sure that a certain amount of it is used in certain ways? And I don't know exactly how to word that, and that probably isn't an answer we can get right now.
A development agreement is definitely something that could be worked through so that there's specific things that you want to see, the breaking up of the block, certain percentage of whatever it may be, ground floor activation, open space, that sort of thing, that could be in a development agreement.
Yeah, and just to be, I think, like, I get that there's a hospital has a pharmacy and a gift shop and a cafeteria and a coffee shop and things like that. Those are all great, but I don't think that those four things are enough street activation for an entire city block. So for me, it would be that there's some amount of that street frontage that is actually just leased space. I think the other thing to remember is that, well, never mind. But I think it just a mixture of uses. Any one large building that is, even if there are ancillary uses that are related to the hospital use, any one large use in a downtown area can become a vacuum. And so we want to avoid that by adding seemingly non-complementary uses into the mix, which would allow that to, I know that a hospital's 24/7, but it's a specific kind of use. And so if we can have a little bit more of a mixture, I think that helps. And this does extend our downtown, our central business district further than we've ever agreed to extend it. So I think it's not too big of an ask to say, well, how can we make sure that that is done in a way that's beneficial to the community?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think following up on what you have said, I think there's a lot of expectation. I think we talked about this in our meetings. There's a lot of expectations from the public, from the council, because it's the culmination of our downtown, if you will, for the next however many years. And so when opportunities like this come along, our expectations are here. And because we laid the groundwork for years, the community is a life on state, our downtown master plan, the heights changes because we want to see something spectacular, and the amount of community engagement has been pretty significant, as you've all read the letter, and every community council that I go to, we talk about IH moving there and what's going to happen. And so I think it's on a more positive note, I think what we expect is for IH to shine and to be that international renowned urban hospital, campus, community, whatever that you might want to call it, that we are known internationally. IH is known internationally in Salt Lake City, such an amazing building, but also an amazing block overall. It's possible. And there are other things that that we talked about in some of our meetings when we meet with the public, but almost everything is there laid in the groundwork already. Like if you look, like we just talked about all the things, we just want to make sure that those happen. I know we also talked about workforce housing for the staff that might be coming to work at the hospital, including the doctors or whoever. So I know that's something that I would like to see as well expand, if we can collaborate or whatever that is, to make it more an even more robust community there. And so that's why I think that development agreement idea is floating around, just to make sure that we can see that through. So having that said, because my expectations are really high, so having that said, is there any way we can see some, or when do you expect to have some conceptual plan or renderings for the building? And I'm not sure if you've already chosen your architecture firm, but I'm sure you're working towards that.
We haven't yet.
Okay.
But part of it is depending on the outcome of the zoning request.
Okay.
So if we have the D1 zoning and we know about the height that we can go, then that would start the design work. We really wouldn't start it until then. And conceptually, we're not opposed with any of these concepts about the permeability, the street activation. I think as far as the development agreement, I think it just becomes a procedural issue, which is why we were excited about the ordinance, because that would give us the mechanism to come back with our design review. We couldn't get the height that we need without, I think some of the criteria here, the mid-block walkway, affordable housing incentives, additional ground floor use and visual interest, those kind of things we would hope could be addressed in that part of the process, which is quite a bit quicker than the multiple rounds that a development agreement would take. So we hope that we can get to the same place via that procedure versus a development agreement, and then move the project forward on a quicker pace, but still meeting the needs of the city and the community.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, and I appreciate the discussion. And I kind of agree with the concept of activating the streets. I'm going to kind of shift it a little bit here. Salt Lake City is growing, and it's nice to have it'd be wonderful to have an urban hospital that people can take public transportation or walk or easily accessible. But also, I'm looking at the services that would be provided at the hospital. 50% of our population is women, so women's reproductive care services. I think that needs to be. I don't know what the mix of your services are for the hospitals and if they change, but that would be something that I think would be necessary and important to have in the city, and that reproductive services would cover the full gamut that is allowed by the laws. And the second one would be mental health services. We have we are the center of a lot of unsheltered people, and well, even sheltered people have a lot of mental health problems. And being a large city, we also need to have plenty of care for that too. And being in the center of the area where we have a lot of HRCs and other permanent supportive housing, if that can also be inbred into the services provided for the hospital, would be invaluable to the city as a whole. So.
Would welcome the chance to actually comment on that. Right now, we have the amazing opportunity to treat a significant number of patients experiencing homelessness. We provide services to a wide swath of individuals, from mental health issues to cancer care to women's reproductive services, and all across that gamut. We do not expect that to change. In fact, we expect that we will continue to offer that extraordinary care in a more accessible location. I love that what we get the ability to do is balance the extreme and important need of our downtown patient population with individuals who will also be traveling from definitely within the state and across the country. And I think this is a really different opportunity that we get to really balance that in a way that benefits patients. So thank you for that.
All right, Councilmember Petro, and then we should probably move on to the next item.
Wait, I have a question.
Okay, Councilmember Petro, then Wharton. Last chance.
I want to thank you for bringing us the opportunity to expand healthcare infrastructure, because we know with the exponential growth we're expecting, if we do not keep up with this, we will find ourselves in a crisis soon. So I look forward to problem solving with you around some of these issues. I think my colleagues, I'm not nearly as concerned about street activation, because I really am concerned about good healthcare access for our citizens, but duly noted, and I'm in support. I am also concerned about inviting in organizations and programs that are responsive to our unique needs. We know that childcare, for instance, is one of them, so making sure that maybe on-site childcare is available, especially constituents in my district who are likely to be the sweat labor that keeps the hospital going, making sure that those kinds of jobs are respectful and responsive to those actual needs. The mental health, of course, is beyond anything we could comprehend. And so as we're moving forward, just making sure that whatever we're building there isn't just forward-looking in terms of what we expect the threshold for the healthcare needs to be, but also responsive to our workforce, responsive to the pressures that we're seeing, and making sure that we're really forward-looking, not just in making sure there's a walkway through the block, but also in making sure that, you all become an avenue for our community to stay healthy. Also, if you could create an urgent care where my kids could get stitches so I don't have to pay an emergency room copay, I would consider having another child to name it after you all. Why? This is the Bronze Age technology. Why am I still spending $1,000 copay to get it done? But that's a different conversation.
Thanks, Councilmember Petro. Councilmember Wharton.
Thanks. I wasn't gonna bring it up, but I appreciate what Councilmember Dugan said, and I guess I want to, and what Councilmember Petro said, and I guess I want to kind of challenge you to think about inclusion and integration in a lot of different ways. I've heard from people in my community, the LGBT community, that they feel that some of what IH is doing is like stepping back from serving the LGBT community. And if there's a way for you to show that commitment in this hospital, whether it's in the programs that you have or how you use the space. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do think that there is that concern, and with the new hospital coming in, people are going to be asking us, what is the city getting in exchange? And is IH going to be the kind of downtown partner that's going to represent everybody in our city and is going to serve everybody in our city? And that's a real concern. And you don't have to explain to me like business decisions that you make or whatever, but I think it's helpful for you to hear that is a concern among populations in Salt Lake City. And I think that conversation is going to keep coming up as more details about this project come forward. And so I would challenge you to think about that level of inclusivity as well as the activation. The IMC Medical Center in Murray, which is a beautiful facility and is a great facility, and we're lucky to have it in Utah, but it really is like difficult to leave the hospital amenities and even go across the street and access them and then get back to the hospital, and to do that safely. I don't want to have that in Salt Lake City. I don't want to have like a row of retail that's like facing away from the hospital where you have to like exit that environment to access, because maybe you have someone that's getting cancer treatment and you just can't eat in the IH cafeteria again, and you have to go across the street and get something else. I want to make it easier for those people to do that. Thanks.
Agreed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We are going to move on to the next item number 4. Thank you for being here.
Taco carts. Sorry, I needed to say that. Let's not forget the taco carts. Just have that in mind. Thanks.
Yeah.
Taco carts are
We really like those taco
Literally
carts.
the very first comment that came my way as we announced that Intermountain Health purchased that square block, and literally a comment that
It's
is
an
heard on a
important
daily
question.
basis.
It's a real important question. What's going to happen to that?
Thank you.
All right, item number 4 is an informational briefing about a text amendment relating to historic carriage houses. We have Nick Tarbett from Council Policy Staff, who will give us an introduction, and then Kelsey Lindquist here from Planning.
All right, I'll give a quick background of this the petition before I turn the time over to Kelsey to go into the details. As you mentioned, this is a zoning text amendment. It's a private initiated petition, but it's a zoning text amendment that would establish a process for permitting the reconstruction of a historic carriage house for the purpose of creating a dwelling unit. The applicant owns a property at 222 East 4th Ave in District 3, which has the remnants of a carriage house on it, and he would like to rebuild it to use for a dwelling unit. This is where things get a little different. That there's technically 2 ordinances for the council can consider tonight. The applicant has a petition that went through the process, and it received a negative recommendation from planning staff, from the planning commission. After that got to the council, Councilmember Wharton had been briefed on the issue numerous times throughout the process. He asked staff if it would be possible to create a different ordinance that would allow the applicant to meet their goals. Planning staff said that was possible, and so there's an outline of an ordinance in the packets that you received. So Kelsey will now go over the 2 different ordinances that are before the council to consider.
Has that second ordinance been through the Planning Commission?
No, and it would not have to go back because it's within the scope of the application.
So we could adopt the second ordinance without Planning Commission recommendation. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is a request for a zoning text amendment from the petitioner Stephen Pace to permit the restoration or reconstruction of a historic carriage house for the purpose of creating a dwelling unit. As you'll see on the aerial, the carriage house is associated with 222 4th Avenue and 181 B Street. Next slide, please. There you go. The subject carriage house is associated with the Beer Estate, which is a landmark site, and was constructed by Richard Kledding. The applicant provided this photo to illustrate the carriage house. Sorry, is anyone else getting an echo? Oh, okay.
It's been happening all day. Sorry.
Okay.
We all feel the same.
This is like a nightmare. Great. Okay. Next slide, please. This is an image of the carriage house from the 1970s. Next slide. Okay, so as discussed within the transmittal and the published staff reports, the current proposal has a number of issues, which Nick Tarbett briefly touched on. They include a narrow applicability, unenforceable language, lack of a clear process, as well as how would we administer the language.
Next slide. For a quick recap of the timeline associated with the petitioner's text amendment, the applicant submitted the text amendment application in 2020. Staff attempted to work with the applicant on the language solutions, but was ultimately unsuccessful. Staff forwarded the amendment to the Historic Landmark Commission for review and ideally direction to the applicant on the proposed language. After a lengthy discussion, the Landmark Commission decided to recommend negatively against the proposal. Eventually, the Planning Commission heard the proposal and forwarded a negative recommendation in February of 2022. The proposal remained unchanged. It was ultimately at the request of the City Council that planning staff drafted the ordinance language to address the identified issues. Next slide. Thank you. So how did we address the issues? We defined the parameters of eligibility to include properties that are a local landmark site and required clear documentation of the footprint, location, shape of the roof, approximate height of the structure, as well as location, arrangement, size, and details of any window or doors, including carriage. It's important to note that this information cannot be conjectural. We also established submittal requirements. These requirements closely follow those of the new construction in any local historic district. We established some zoning flexibility for the reconstructed structure. These include lot, bulk, and density. Established allowed uses. It can be a single-family home, any allowed accessory use in the district, or an ADU. Also established a prohibition on any future subdivision of the property. Created an application and review process with the Historic Landmark Commission having the authority of approval or denial. Also requires the applicant to submit an updated intensive level survey to planning. This would be utilized for updating our records after the carriage house is reconstructed. Next slide. So that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions about our draft.
Okay, let me just, in general terms, the two separate things are both intended to allow a dwelling to be built out of this existing remnants of this existing carriage house. Why isn't that already allowed as an ADU?
It is under the current ADU ordinance.
Okay. It could be allowed, and the setbacks and everything would be acceptable. Because doesn't the ADU have an exception for existing structures?
The historic districts and landmark sites have an exception built into the overlay. It would likely end up going to Landmark Commission, but it is something that we could accommodate.
Okay, so even if we said no to both ordinances, a dwelling could still be built in this carriage house as an ADU.
That's correct.
Okay. What does this do that's different than what the ADU ordinance, what does this allow that would be different than what the ADU ordinance would allow?
Well, this
Is
would
the
be
1,000 square foot maximum?
Yeah, it would allow a structure larger than the ADU limitations. It would also allow a reconstruction of a historic element of a landmark site. So it provides a process.
And otherwise, a reconstruction of a historic element on a landmark site would not be allowed?
Reconstruction is not very straightforward, and we don't really have a path for reconstruction in our ordinance.
So right now, if a contributing historic structure is partially or fully demolished, we actually don't have a way that you could rebuild that.
We're actually drafting code language right now.
Separate ordinance. Okay, thanks,
Separate
Kelsey.
ordinance to deal with demolition violations. Yeah.
Okay. All right, council members, any more questions? I believe the applicant is here. Before the applicant comes up, any questions from council members?
Just a fun fact, I was on the HLC when this first came through.
Isn't that fun?
Full
to see those
circle.
things? Pretty sure there's still some things that that are hanging out from when I was on planning. Okay, well, if the applicant's here, feel free to come up if you'd like to, and you have 5 minutes to address the council on anything related to this application.
Promise not to spit up if I can get a small glass of water.
While he's doing that, I'll actually start. My name's Kirk Huffaker, and I've been the preservation consultant to the applicant, Mr. Stephen Pace. And, you know, to me, this really shows the range of things you guys deal with. I mean, from talking about an IH urban hospital to a carriage house on a very small piece of property in the avenues. But we thank you for your time to consider this. As Kelsey has said and described it, this has been a long process. It's been sort of ups and downs. I do want to commend the planning division for continuing to work with us and the applicant to get to this point, and Nick Tarbett and Councilman Wharton for helping to get it here today before you. So my job really is to talk about how significant of a parcel this is historically. It was an individual landmark in the late 1970s, even before the Avenues was a historic district. This was a recognized historic property associated with Dr. Beers, who was one of the earliest OBGYNs in the city, and was very well respected. And you know, built a mansion, and this carriage house came soon after the mansion in the late 1800s, designed by Richard K.A. Kledding, really the godfather of historic architecture in Utah. And so its architectural character is cannot be overstated. Unfortunately, this carriage house is really the last missing piece of this estate, and the applicant desires to rebuild that and bring that estate back together. This was never really a joined parcel at the corner of B Street and 4th Avenue. They were separate parcels, but really realizing that the original vision of Richard Kledding is the goal of rebuilding the carriage house, and that's what this process will help facilitate. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Pace.
Thanks, Kirk.
In looking at the policy findings.
If you could just get the microphone a little closer to you so we can hear. Thank you.
Thank you. In looking at the policy findings that the planning staff came up with 4 years ago, when we first had a run at this project, beginning on page 3 of this document, you'll find a lot of stuff to like, I think, about this proposal. The key consideration on page 6 is that the proposal fits with everything that the adopted policies are. The standards of review, the proposed zoning changes are kosher. The city plan considerations have been met. The analysis of zoning amendment standards has been met. You can see that these things run to a whole lot of pages in the 180 plus page staff report. The furtherance of specific zoning standards is met. The purpose statements of the zoning ordinance is met. The proposal is consistent with the purposes of the overlay district, and to the extent that the proposed text amendment implements best current planning practices, it does that. So we had I tend to look a little bit ahead sometimes in the reading, and we couldn't see anything very much that looked like it was a deal killer on this project, but nonetheless, Historic Landmarks Commission did kill the deal when this was presented to them in 2000, in the year 2000. So we're back with it. The downsides, if there are any downsides, which I doubt to this project, are pretty minimal. There have been some concerns raised to the benefits of the proposed text amendment, but the criticisms simply do not hold water based on close reviews. We'd invite anybody to either come out and look at the property or put whatever kind of spotlight you want on the way this was conceived and the way documents were put together on it, and we're basically pretty proud of it. There were some concerns raised which we failed to completely understand by the Historic Landmarks Commission, stating that individuals would perhaps try to take advantage and build faux carriage houses, as the planning division referred to it. I guess that's a French word for fake. Makes it sound more disgusting. But we couldn't find anybody that built a fake carriage house in Utah. We'd be glad to be educated on that if such a thing exists.
Thanks.
But,
Timekeeper's telling us that that's 5 minutes. I want to just clarify, from my understanding, does the second proposed text accommodate what the applicant is asking for? I don't know if Kirk or Mr. Pace, you're able to, you've had a chance to look at that, but I think it's an amendment. So I see a nodding yes.
Excuse me? Do you want to answer that question? Yeah. So you had a question?
Yeah, the proposed ordinance that our planning staff at the request of Councilmember Wharton have come up with, it sounds like we all believe that will accommodate this request in a way that will alleviate some of the concerns that the Planning Commission, Historic Landmark Commission had. Just wanted, for the record, does the applicant believe that will accommodate the goal as well?
Well, I guess my take on this thing is slightly different than yours. I look at it and think that there are very few of these things left, carriage houses left in this town. Probably you could count them on.
Yeah, the question is whether or not, if we approve this second ordinance, if your goals will be met.
If my goal is met?
Would your goal be met with us approving the second ordinance?
I believe we'd go a long ways towards it, yes.
Okay. So, council members, any other questions for the applicant while we have them? Appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for helping us through this, Kirk. Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you for assisting. This will be next Tuesday. We will be setting the date. Do you want to walk through the timeline?
So can we just get confirmation that the council is okay with finalizing that second ordinance for consideration?
Oh.
Like, we have an outline draft, but we just...
To me, that sounds like it's accomplishing everyone's goal.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that.
Seeing yeses that let's move forward with that plan. We'll be setting the public hearing next week. The public comment period would be on August 8th with tentative action on August 15th. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we are moving on to item number 5, which is a resolution about the Community Renewable Energy Program Utility Agreement. Sam Owen is online. Hi, Sam. And he is going to explain this to us. And then Debbie Lyons, oh, Debbie's here. Hi. Will help talk us through this. Oh, no. You're not Debbie. You're Sophia. Debbie's back there. I see. Okay. Sam,
Thanks,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair. Thank you. Sorry to be joining you remotely. Had a scheduling issue this afternoon. So I'll just briefly go over the thing you're considering, the thing that's being presented to you today. Scott, are you able to pull up maybe the slides are already up there. I don't know for sure if they are. Here they are. Great. Thanks. I appreciate it. So we can advance one. Okay, so today, the transmittal that the council is going to discuss, has had an opportunity to review, that staff has worked on, is a resolution. So I'll just ask you to keep that in your mind for a minute while we advance to the next slide to kind of at a high level go over the details of the resolution. So Community Renewable Energy Agency making its application to the state regulatory body. As part of that, all of the member cities sign a utility agreement that has to do with allocating certain costs between the communities and Rocky Mountain Power. As that comes to fruition, this resolution has been presented to you, and it really does these three main things as part of the resolved clauses. And those are the three things enumerated at the bottom of this slide. One basically validates and ratifies the city's participation in the Community Renewable Energy Agency and advancing with the program and its application. Two, demonstrate support of Councilmember Dan Dugan in executing the utility agreement in his role as chair of the board of the Community Renewable Energy Agency. And then three, this was already true, but is important, I think, to clarify here again. The City Council reserves its rights to separately consider adoption of the ordinance that would enact the renewable energy program. So any requirement or obligation that comes to the city as a result of the utility agreement only becomes active when the council considers and potentially adopts the ordinance that activates the program for Salt Lake City. So keeping all of that in mind, we're kind of going to this ordinance consideration. And this utility agreement step is on the path to this ordinance consideration that the Salt Lake City Council will have the opportunity to take up, not for a while, probably like 3 or 6 months down the road. So I want to stop there if it's okay, Mr. Chair, and answer questions that I can from council members, or see if there are questions that would be more appropriate to direct to administration staff. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Sam. Council members, any questions for Sam? All right, seeing none, does the department have a briefing or any additional information? Is there a light?
There we go. Yeah, I just want to talk about how much we've done coming to this point so far. We're bringing the resolution to you in part because this is the single largest undertaking for the city as we work to meet our net 100% clean electricity goals and our 80% carbon reduction goals for the community. And we've been working on it since well before 2019. And I think we're seeing the impacts of climate change around the country right now. Thankfully, we're not experiencing anything like Vermont or the South or all of these places that are really experiencing some horrific climate impacts. But I think it just underscores why it is that we're doing this from our perspective. So in the spirit of working with you, the City Council, and wanting to keep you informed early and often, we're about to, fingers crossed, achieve a very significant milestone with the CREA, the Utah 100 Communities Agency. And we expect that they will be able to vote on the utility agreement as early as next week. And
in that spirit, we wanted to bring this to you to signal the council's continuing support of the Community Renewable Energy Program, as well as Salt Lake City's continued forward progress on the program. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions, and certainly Councilmember Dugan can also speak to it, and Christopher is our staff expert as well. So thank you.
Great. Thanks for all the work that you've been doing. We've heard about this a lot, and I think we're all excited about it. Are there any questions from council members?
So I just want to kind of reiterate the utility agreement, just a couple things. And we've been working with Rocky Mountain Power to write this document so that we can approve it across the 18 municipalities that are part of the program. This is a piece of the application process that goes before the Public Services Commission. And this is just one piece of that. And there's multiple parts of this. And this is really just kind of a basic steps that says, hey, we have terms of consultants. We've already done that. How we pay out opt-out notices, we've already done that. We budgeted that. And how we do some unpaid termination fees. And that's just those are just a high-level side of the house. This is just one piece of it. And part of that is once we apply that, we get that 6 months later, then we as a council and all the rest of the municipalities, we vote on the full package of the whole program, whether we opt in or opt out. This does not talk about cost to members who will be participating in it, whether they're individual residencies or businesses, or how we do the financial backstop to the different resource providers or any termination fees. So this is just one small piece. There's no more financial responsibility at this point because we're already paid going forward.
Right,
we'll be looking for a motion and approval of it in the near future.
Great. I appreciate the update. I would love, Councilor Dugan, if you can just keep us updated on your work on that. If there's anything major that changes, but I think that the council is in pretty unanimous support of this. So once things need to come back to us for official action, I think we're ready to do that. But I feel comfortable with the direction that's been going, and I think that we can maybe take the informational briefings as a written briefing next time so that we can just keep this process moving forward. Thanks, Councilor Dugan. All right, we are moving on to item number 6, which is a written briefing related to the frequent transit bus networks. Item number 7 has been removed, and so we are now on item number 8, which is a board appointment for the Peanut Parks, Natural Lands, Urban Forestry, and Trails Advisory Board for Carrie Nakamura. Hi, Carrie.
Hi. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you. You're a
good
familiar,
to be seen.
you're a familiar face to all of us, but for the public, would you introduce yourself and talk about why you want to give some of your free time to the city to talk about parks?
Sure. So my name is Carrie Nakamura, and thank you for considering my application for this board. I was a 30-plus year public employee. I decided I don't call it a retirement. I stepped away from a structured schedule maybe about 2 months ago now. But I started looking around for different things that I wanted to do to stay involved and engaged in the community. And about 18 months ago, my husband and I moved to Salt Lake City. We've always been avid park users and public trail users. And living in a condo now, they're even more important to us, those amenities. And we're really understanding how those amenities also help kids who grow up in those kinds of environments, because that is their green space. That is where they do sidewalk chalk, those kinds of things. And so it's something I know government, I know budgets, I know how that works. I'm excited to be part of that process. And this just seemed like a great opportunity to continue to serve the community if you will have me.
I'm very excited to have you on the Peanut Board. Council members, any other questions or comments for Carrie?
Mr. Chair, I don't have a comment to a question to Carrie Nakamura, but I do have a comment. Carrie has been not only a mentor, but the reason that I am anything today is in great part to Carrie Nakamura. I mean, I'm not kidding. And no, this is not, superfluous. This is very real to me. She's been the biggest cheerleader and supporter, and called me out when I did something wrong very many times. And I owe a great deal of gratitude to her and her leadership, and she's one of the smartest people I know. So we're very lucky to have her. If we support this, and I think that we will, I hope so. So I just wanted to say that on the record, because she is an asset, and I'm very happy that she moved to Salt Lake City to have her.
The District 5.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
So thank you.
Well, Alejandro, I'm very humbled by those words, and you're a very easy and fun person to support.
Thank you so much. We're honored to have you serving the city. You'll be on our consent agenda tonight for approval.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your meeting. I've enjoyed listening to the conversation up until now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that moves us to our standing items. Number 9 is a report of chair and vice chair. No reports today. We do have some announcements from the executive director. There should be go ahead, Jennifer.
There's a page in front of you guys. Just wanting to draw your attention to the schedule for Thursday, July 13th, since it's a little different. The State of Downtown, hosted by the Downtown Alliance, is this Thursday at Le Meridian, and at 3 p.m. they'll honor recipients of the Downtown Creator Award, which this year includes Danny Walls, the RDA director. The meeting is scheduled for later than 4:15. So the Downtown Alliance event is scheduled to go later than 4:15, but we understand the bulk of the program will be between 3 and 4:30 for any council members who are interested in going. The city council meeting, where you will conduct vacancy interviews, will start at 4:30. So maybe keep us posted if you're planning on going, and then we can figure out the most efficient way to transport you from those items. If you could confirm your attendance with staff, that way we can RSVP with the Downtown Alliance so they know how many of you guys to plan on. I think they had reserved a couple of spaces just so that we make sure we have enough. And then at 4:30, you'll start your council meeting, and just wanting to confirm that you guys will be there for that, since it's a pretty important council meeting on Thursday. And thanks to John Rand and the IMS team's hard work, we'll be having it in the chambers across the hall. So, finally, very exciting.
Thank you, team, for getting that room ready for us. And District 7 applicants, we're excited to hear from you on Thursday at 4:30. All right, let's see. And we do not have a closed session today that I'm aware of, so we are adjourned from our work session. We'll come back at 7 o'clock. Also across the hall today. We're going across the hall today.
Is that for real?
Yes, your dreams are coming true.
First time?
Like, who had texted you guys about an hour ago? So yeah, we just wanted to make sure.
So we'll
Thanks
see you
to
across
John.
the hall.
Wow.
If you see John Rand, give him a high five.